Welcome to The Psychology of Gambling, the podcast for Mind Over Odds, where we believe if you control your emotions, you control your outcomes.
I want you to just picture this for a second. You have been grinding for years. Like maybe you are working tirelessly for this massive promotion at work, and you are putting in, 60-hour weeks.
Oh yeah, we've all been there.
Right. Or you're sacrificing everything, skipping vacations and dinners out just to pay off this huge mountain of debt. Or perhaps you've been meticulously analyzing stats and chasing that one massive sports parlay.
The big one.
Exactly. The kind of jackpot that you swear is going to instantly fix every single problem in your life.
But then it actually happens.
Yes, it happens. You hit the goal, the money lands in the account, the promotion is announced, you finally have exactly what you wanted. But when that moment actually arrives, instead of euphoria, you just feel surprisingly empty.
You feel stressed.
Yeah, stressed and, a little lost.
It is a profoundly disorienting experience. You're sitting there looking at the bank balance thinking, I won. I got the ultimate prize. Why do I feel so hollow?
And then the guilt usually sets in right after.
Oh, exactly, because society tells you that you should be jumping for joy. If you aren't, you assume something is fundamentally broken inside of you. But today's deep dive, which is titled, Why One Big Win Can Quietly Ruin Your Life, is going to challenge that assumption completely. We are going to unpack the hidden psychological traps of sudden success.
Which I think is so important, because getting what you want can actually trigger a biological crisis.
It really can. And beyond just understanding why that happens, we are going to share some simple daily habits to help you build the emotional control you need to survive those really intense highs.
So to understand the emotional and honestly the financial ruin that can sometimes follow a big win, we have to look closely at the biological letdown that happens the exact moment the victory is secured.
Right, the brain chemistry side of it.
Yeah, there's a psychological concept known as the Arrival Fallacy. Dr. Dalben Shahar coined the term, and it basically describes the false belief that reaching a specific milestone will deliver enduring, permanent happiness.
That is the ultimate trap, isn't it? Like if I just get this one thing, if I just hit this one ticket, I'll be happy forever.
Yes.
It's the whole happily ever after narrative we are fed from childhood.
It is, but our evolutionary biology actively dismantles that happily ever after. It really comes down to the neurobiology of pursuit. We hear the word dopamine thrown around constantly, right, as the feel-good chemical.
Like it's a reward.
Exactly. But that's a dangerous oversimplification. Dopamine is actually the achievement hormone. It's designed for the hunt, not the catch.
Okay, so wait. It's the neurochemical drive to close the gap between where you are and what you want.
You got it.
So it's the fuel for the pursuit, not the reward for crossing the finish line.
That is the crucial distinction. Your brain gets heavily stimulated by anticipating the reward. Evolutionarily speaking, if our early ancestors killed a mammoth and felt a permanent sense of blissful satisfaction, they would have just stopped hunting.
Right, they'd sit around and eventually starve to death a month later.
Exactly. Dissatisfaction is literally an evolutionary survival mechanism. The brain needs the dopamine to drop, so you're motivated to go out and hunt again.
Wow, okay, so getting exactly what I wanted is basically biologically programmed to let me down.
Pretty much, yeah.
That makes biological sense, but it's incredibly counterintuitive for how we live today. I mean, it's kind of like spending 6 months excitedly planning a vacation and building it up in your head, and then the actual trip just feels exhausting.
Oh, that is a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Because it goes deeper than just a letdown. When that win happens and the dopamine drops off a cliff, your brain expects a massive surge of internal peace.
But it doesn't get it.
Right. When the massive win doesn't bring that lasting peace, your nervous system registers this gap. Psychologists call this a negative prediction error.
A negative prediction error.
Yeah. You expected a 10 out of 10 emotional state, you got a temporary thrill that faded, and your brain treats that mismatch as a failure. Even though you just won the lottery, your nervous system processes the emotional gap as a loss.
That is wild. Even though you won, your body feels like you lost.
Exactly.
But if dopamine drops that fast and leaves us feeling like we actually lost something, it makes me wonder how anyone stays happy at all over the long term. Like, is it just a permanent emotional crash, or does the brain eventually reset itself?
The brain absolutely resets, but not necessarily in a way that leaves you feeling fulfilled. And this brings us to a phenomenon known as hedonic adaptation.
Okay.
You'll sometimes hear it referred to as a hedonic treadmill. It's the psychological mechanism where human beings quickly return to a relatively stable default setting of happiness, regardless of major positive or negative life changes.
So no matter what happens to your bank account, you eventually just bounce back to whatever your baseline mood was before the win?
Largely, yes. There is a fascinating landmark study from 1978 by a researcher named Philip Brickman that perfectly illustrates this. His team took two incredibly extreme opposite ends of the human experience.
Okay, what were they?
They compared the happiness levels of people who had recently won major lotteries to people who had recently become paralyzed in devastating accidents.
Wow. It's hard to imagine two more divergent life events. I mean, you'd assume the lottery winners were off the charts in happiness and the accident victims were permanently devastated.
That was the assumption everyone had, but the findings completely shocked the psychological community. Within just a year, the lottery winners reported being no happier on a daily basis than they were before their massive windfall.
Wait, really? Just 1 year?
Just 1 year. And the paralyzed individuals, while facing immense challenges, obviously, actually demonstrated a return toward their previous baseline levels of happiness much faster than anyone anticipated.
That is incredible.
Yeah, the lottery winners simply got used to the wealth. The thrill completely vanished.
It's like upgrading to a brand new smartphone.
Oh, absolutely.
You get it and it feels like magic for 3 days. The screen is so crisp, it's so fast, but by next week, you're annoyed that the battery isn't 10% faster. It just becomes normal.
That is a phenomenal way to look at it. You are describing the creation of a new normal. As your income or your success rises, your expectations and your desires rise right in tandem with it. A massive win doesn't elevate your happiness permanently, it just resets your neutral baseline.
So what used to be a rare luxury becomes a standard daily requirement.
Exactly. You aren't happier, you just require more expensive things to avoid feeling bored.
But wait, if we eventually just return to our baseline happiness, why do so many big winners actually end up miserable, isolated, or completely bankrupt? If it's just a peaceful return to the way things were before the win, they should be fine. They'd just be regular people who happen to drive nicer cars.
You'd think so, but that's where things take a much darker turn. Because for many people experiencing a sudden windfall, it isn't a peaceful return to baseline at all. It is an active trauma response.
A trauma response from winning.
Yes. There is a clinical condition called sudden wealth syndrome. It's a term developed by psychologist Stephen Goldbart. It is fundamentally an identity crisis that strikes when wealth or success arrives faster than the human brain can process it.
An identity crisis, meaning you suddenly don't know who you are anymore in relation to the world and the people around you.
Precisely. And the symptoms can be incredibly severe. The first major symptom we see is acute isolation and paranoia. Winners become absolutely terrified of losing their new status and their new money.
Oh, I can totally see that.
It leads to something called ticker shock, where individuals obsessively check their bank accounts, their investments, or their betting balances, like constantly. Right. Every minor market fluctuation or expense feels like a life or death threat to their new identity.
I imagine that paranoia bleeds into their social lives, too. If you don't trust the stock market, you probably don't trust your cousin who suddenly wants to pitch you a business idea.
The social isolation is often the most painful part of the whole experience. They start distancing themselves from friends and family because relationships become heavily strained. There's envy from peers or just constant requests for loans and gifts.
Which has to make you question everyone's motives.
Exactly. The winner starts to wonder, do you love me? Or do you love the access my money provides? And compounding that paranoia is the second major symptom, guilt.
Guilt? Why guilt?
It's an intense, often irrational survivor's guilt about having unearned fortune when the people they love are still struggling to pay rent.
Wow. So you win the ultimate prize, and your reward is paranoia, social isolation, and guilt.
The statistics are a pretty sobering reality check. Studies suggest roughly 66% of major lottery winners experience significant symptoms of sudden wealth syndrome.
66%.
Yeah, and about 40% report feeling deep guilt compared to their peers. And sleep disorders, things like insomnia, night terrors actually double in the first year after a big win.
Sleep disorders doubling just shows how much the nervous system is completely redlining. You're living in a constant state of fight or flight, even though you technically have more resources than you ever dreamed of. That kind of chronic stress is incredibly dangerous. And, speaking of that intense stress and the dark side of winning, if you or someone you know struggles with compulsive or problem gambling, free help is available 24 hours a day by calling 1-800-GAMBLER.
It is so vital to reach out and talk to someone because that psychological distress we are talking about with sudden wealth syndrome doesn't just stay in your head. It leads directly to self-sabotage and very real financial ruin.
Let's connect those dots. How does feeling isolated and guilty translate into going totally broke?
Well, the reality of bankruptcy among a sudden wealth recipients is staggering. Research indicates that up to 70% of lottery winners go bankrupt within 7 years.
70%. That is a massive failure rate for people who literally have it made.
And it extends far beyond lotteries. We see similar patterns in professional sports, where around 78% of NFL players face severe financial stress or bankruptcy within just 2 years of retiring.
Wait, I have to push back on this a little bit because when we see a lottery winner or a newly signed athlete buying 5 luxury cars, throwing massive yacht parties and buying mansions for their entourage, they clearly want the stuff. It's hard for me to buy that a guy popping champagne on a boat is secretly just trying to bankrupt himself to feel safe. Is it really that unconscious?
It is incredibly unconscious, and that's really the tragedy of it. Psychologically, that reckless spending isn't about enjoying the money. It is very often a deeply ingrained coping mechanism.
To deal with the stress.
Yes. They are trying to relieve the immense anxiety that the wealth has brought into their lives. On a subconscious level, they spend recklessly to exhaust the source of their stress so they can just feel normal again. They want the pressure off, and the only way their brain knows how to remove the pressure is to remove the money.
So they are actively blowing up their own financial security because the money itself has become a traumatic trigger.
Yes. And the other massive factor driving that bankruptcy is the absence of what we call the value of friction.
The value of friction, what is that?
Think about someone who builds wealth slowly, over 20 years, by growing a small business. That slow process is full of friction. It teaches you discipline. You learn how to manage payroll, how to budget for taxes, how to hire the right people, and how to maintain complex assets.
So you build the mental and operational infrastructure to actually handle the weight of the wealth.
Exactly. Sudden wealth completely bypasses that essential apprenticeship of sacrifice. It leaves the person with vast purchasing power, but absolute zero operational capacity to sustain it.
They just don't have the reps.
Right. They don't understand the insidious nature of lifestyle creep. They don't anticipate the massive tax burdens or the hidden recurring costs of maintaining luxury assets like those yachts and mansions.
It's basically like being handed the keys to a commercial airliner without ever going to flight school. You have all this incredible power at your fingertips, but you have no idea what any of the buttons actually do. When turbulence hits, you're definitely going to crash.
That's a brilliant analogy, and it traps people in something psychologists refer to as the success trap. The individual realizes they are in the cockpit of that airliner, and they don't know how to fly. They become paralyzed and extremely risk-averse.
Because they're terrified of messing up?
Exactly. Overwhelmed by their new reality and their total lack of preparation, they freeze. They either make terrible impulsive decisions to escape the stress, or they make no decisions at all, which just allows bad investments and leeches to bleed the wealth away.
Okay, well, we've painted a fairly terrifying picture of the human brain here.
We are.
If getting what we want biologically sets us up for a letdown, and sudden wealth often leads straight into trauma and bankruptcy, what is the defense mechanism? Whether a listener is dealing with a massive windfall, a substantial casino win, or just reaching a hard-fought everyday financial goal, emotional control is the key to outcome control. How do we actually implement safeguards?
Fortunately, you are not purely at the mercy of your neurochemistry. There are highly effective daily habits you can build to protect your emotional baseline. The absolute first rule when you hit a major milestone or receive a financial windfall is to enter what experts call the decision-free zone.
I love the sound of a decision-free zone. What does that actually look like in practice?
It means forcing a hard pause on your life. You do not make any major life changes immediately after a win. You don't quit your job the next morning. You don't buy a new house. You don't give away large sums of money to family. And you absolutely do not make any flashy investments.
So what do you do with it?
You put the money in a safe, boring, low-yield account, and you just let your nervous system settle.
I imagine there is a ton of psychological resistance to that. Because when you win, your dopamine is screaming at you to act. You want to celebrate. You want to change your life right now. Putting it in a boring account probably feels like a punishment.
It feels incredibly unnatural, which is why it requires immense discipline. Your brain is craving action, but action in a highly emotional state is almost always destructive. You have to give yourself a mandatory waiting period, sometimes 3 to 6 months, just to come down from that dopamine spike and let the shock wear off. Once the emotional high dissipates, you can start making rational plans.
So hit the brakes and wait for the logical brain to come back online. What's the second habit?
The second habit is to construct what we can call a career reinvention board, which is essentially a rock-solid support network. You need to surround yourself with objective, trusted people.
Like professionals.
Yes, if you've come into significant wealth, this should include a fiduciary financial advisor, someone legally bound to act in your best interest, and perhaps a therapist who specializes in life transitions. But it also means leaning on grounded friends who knew you long before the win.
Because when you win big, a lot of people suddenly want to be your best friend. You need the people who aren't impressed by the money to keep you anchored to reality. You need the friend who will still tell you when your ideas are terrible.
Exactly. You need accountability from people who value your character, not your net worth. They are the ones who will pull you out of the isolation that sudden wealth syndrome thrives on.
That makes total sense.
And the third habit we need to talk about is a fundamental mindset shift. Process over product. We talked earlier about the arrival fallacy, that dangerous if-then thinking. Like, if I win this parlay, then I'll be happy. You have to train your brain to find joy in the present moment and the daily routine.
Right, because if the dopamine is truly in the hunt, like we established earlier, then if you only care about the finish line, you're going to be miserable for the entire race. And you'll be profoundly disappointed when the race is over. You have to actually learn to like running.
That is the secret to enduring happiness.
Mm.
You have to learn to love the work, the discipline, the everyday habits of your life, which leads directly to the final and perhaps most difficult practice to master. You must separate your identity from your outcomes.
That is a massive hurdle, especially for high achievers or competitive bettors. We tie so much of our self-worth to whether we won or lost on any given day.
It is the hardest habit to build, but it's the ultimate shield against the emotional roller coaster. You have to internalize the fact that a massive win doesn't make you a superior person, and a loss doesn't make you a failure. Your worth as a human being is not tied to the balance in your bank account, the title on your business card, or the outcome of a game. If your entire identity is wrapped up in being the winner, then when the thrill of the win fades, and we know biologically that it will fade, you won't know who you are anymore.
That brings us full circle back to that identity crisis we discussed. If you are already a complete, grounded person before the money hits, the money is just a tool. It might buy you a nicer car or a longer vacation, but it doesn't define you. But if you are using the money to try and fill a hole in your soul, the money is just going to tear you apart.
It acts as an accelerant for whatever is already inside you. And that leaves us with a final thought to ponder today. The ultimate irony of the big win is that true wealth isn't the money you suddenly acquire.
What is it then?
True wealth is the emotional resilience, the depth of your relationships, and the sense of purpose that you built before the money ever showed up. If your internal house isn't in order, no external jackpot is ever going to fix the roof.
That is a powerful visual to leave with. If the roof is leaking and the foundation is cracked, putting a solid gold chandelier in the living room doesn't stop the rain. You have to do the internal work first. Well, if you found this conversation helpful today, please follow and like the show or leave us a 5-star review. It helps more people in our community find these resources. You can also visit the Mind Over Odds YouTube channel for more psychology-based insights on gambling behavior. We'll talk to you next time. Control your emotions. Control your outcomes.